Welcome to today's deep dive. To start things off, I want you to imagine your boss gives you a company car.
Oh, that's a pretty great perk, right?
Right. It's a huge perk. So you sell your personal vehicle to save on insurance and parking. You basically build your entire daily routine around this new reality.
Yeah, you adapt your whole life to it.
Exactly. But then, 3 years later, management just suddenly takes the company car back, hands you a bus schedule, and says, hey, why are you so upset? You should be grateful you still have a job.
Wow. Yeah, that sinking feeling of betrayal right there.
Yeah, that deep betrayal. And that isn't just about a car. That's the exact friction that ignited in early 2025 when massive corporations just suddenly demanded their employees return to the office.
Right. It was a complete shock to the system for so many people.
It really was. So whether you're a manager right now trying to keep your team from quitting, or you're an employee navigating a commute you thought you left in the past, this isn't just a debate about office chairs and water coolers. We're looking at a fundamental tectonic shift in the entire employer-employee relationship.
Absolutely.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're tearing into a really dense, fascinating 2026 academic article by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover. It's called Organizational Responses to the Return to Office Mandate.
And, the timing on this research is just critical. I mean, we spent the last few years drowning in op-eds and really emotional arguments about remote work.
Oh, so many think pieces.
Too many. But what this article does is it strips all of that away to just look at the raw data. It examines the actual mechanics of what happens to a company's productivity, their turnover, and culture when the structure of our work lives gets completely upended by these leadership mandates.
Yeah, and to really grasp the scale of this, we have to set the scene of that 2025 whiplash. You had giants, Amazon, Dell, JP Morgan Chase companies that had previously championed flexibility suddenly reversing course.
Just out of nowhere, it felt like.
Totally. They dropped the hammer with these strict 5-day-a-week in-office mandates. It was huge.
It was. And to understand the magnitude of that shock, you have to look at where the workforce actually was right before those mandates hit. I mean, by 2026, the data showed that 40% of full-time U.S. employees had integrated hybrid or fully virtual work into their lives.
Wow, almost half.
Yeah. And on average, they were spending 27% of their time working remotely. So, that isn't a temporary perk anymore. That is long enough for people to completely rewire their lives.
Right, because they moved further from city centers, they completely restructured their childcare, and just changed how they managed their households day to day. Oh, wait, let me play devil's advocate here for a second. Because I've been on those nightmare video calls where, like, 3 people talk at once, someone's dog is barking in the background, and a simple brainstorm just takes an hour and a half.
Oh, yeah. We've all been there. It's painful.
Right. We all know that friction. So if leadership is looking at that and saying, hey, we need to fix this, we need people back in a room, isn't that a valid argument? Like, were these mandates just about collaboration, or was there something else going on?
Well, you're hitting on the core tension of the research right there. The article actually splits the corporate reasoning into 2 very distinct categories, the stated motives and the hidden motives.
Okay, so the stated reasons are the ones they put in the company-wide emails.
Exactly. The stated reasons are what you just described. You hear it in every single town hall, right? Leaders saying they need to protect innovation capacity, or that spontaneous hallway conversations are the lifeblood of company culture, and, that video calls degrade collaboration.
Which, I mean, that feels intuitively true to a lot of people.
It does feel true, but the data reveals that those stated motives are often masking the hidden ones. So, let's look at the actual mechanics of corporate real estate.
Oh, right. The buildings.
Yeah, these massive organizations are locked into 5, 10, or even 20-year commercial leases, or they just spend billions building a state-of-the-art campus. When those buildings sit empty, it's a glaring, incredibly expensive sunk cost on a balance sheet.
Ouch. Yeah.
And the financial pressure from the board to justify that massive real estate footprint is immense.
So forcing people back is partially just a way to make sure the building doesn't look like a terrible investment.
Yeah, that's a big part of it.
That is wild. But what about the management side of things? Because the article mentions this phrase, quiet firing, which just sounds incredibly cynical.
It is deeply cynical, but mechanically, it's actually a highly effective financial maneuver.
Wait, really? How?
Well, think about it. Official corporate layoffs are expensive and messy. You have to pay out massive severance packages, you take a big hit to your stock price, and the PR is just terrible.
Right. Nobody wants to be the company making headlines for firing thousands of people.
Exactly. So quiet firing is when an organization implements a rigid return-to-office mandate with the explicit internal expectation that a certain percentage of the workforce will just refuse and simply quit.
Wow. So they basically weaponize the commute to avoid paying severance.
Precisely. They achieve their workforce reduction targets through voluntary attrition rather than official layoffs.
That is, I mean, that's brutal.
It is. But the problem is that employees aren't blind, right? They see the empty buildings, they read the financial reports, and they understand when a policy feels punitive rather than productive.
Right.
And that disconnect, between leaders saying, oh, we need you back for the culture, when employees know it's actually about real estate or downsizing, that is exactly what breeds absolute cynicism.
And that cynicism leads us right back to that company car analogy we started with. Because the research frames all this fallout around a concept called the psychological contract, which I honestly found to be one of the most illuminating parts of this entire paper.
Oh, for sure. The psychological contract is essentially the invisible glue of the workplace. It's not your legal employment contract or your salary agreement. It's the unwritten set of expectations, beliefs, and obligations between you and your employer.
So it's like when a company funds your home office setup in 2022 or hires you with the understanding that you only need to commute 2 days a week, they're building a psychological contract that flexibility is the new norm.
Exactly. Because you build your actual life architecture on top of that unwritten promise.
Yeah.
You buy a house an hour away because you figure, hey, I only have to make this drive occasionally.
Yeah, you've made huge life choices based on it.
Right. So when an executive suddenly revokes that flexibility unilaterally, the employee doesn't just process it as a simple policy update. Mentally and emotionally, they process it as a profound betrayal of trust. The employer just broke the deal.
But surely, I mean, in a tough economy, people are just going to swallow their pride and keep their jobs, right? A betrayal is bad, but losing your paycheck is worse.
You would think so, but the data tells a completely different story.
Really?
Yeah. Organizations that enforced abrupt, strict mandates saw a massive 15% to 30% spike in turnover in the first year alone.
30%. That's not just a few disgruntled people leaving. That's like a structural collapse.
It is. And here is the truly dangerous mechanism behind that turnover. It's selective attrition.
Meaning they don't get to pick who leaves.
Exactly. If a company uses a mandate hoping 10% of people will quit, they don't get to choose which 10% leave. The people who leave first are always your highest performing employees.
Oh, because top performers have the strongest resumes. If they want flexibility, they just jump ship to a competitor who actually offers it.
Right. The external labor market rewards them. Meanwhile, the average or, underperforming employees, the ones who might struggle to find a new job, those are the ones who stay and comply.
Wow. So the company loses all its innovators and just retains the people who are essentially there to punch the clock. That makes total sense, especially when you factor in the sheer cost of going back to the office, because the paper breaks down the math, and it is staggering. Returning to the office costs an individual employee between $5,000 and $10,000 annually.
Yeah, let's break down those mechanics, because it's not just gas money we're talking about here.
Right.
It's reinstated after-school childcare, which is incredibly expensive. It's public transit passes, vehicle maintenance, and professional wardrobes. And then there is the temporal cost.
The time.
Yes. Employees are losing 60 to 90 minutes a day just commuting. If you calculate the hourly value of that lost time, combined with all the hard expenses, going back to the office effectively constitutes a massive pay cut for doing the exact same job.
So employees are treating flexibility like currency now.
The research confirms exactly that. Job seekers currently value flexible work arrangements so highly that they literally treat them as equivalent to a 10% to 15% salary increase.
Okay, so let's follow this logic for a second. If companies are intentionally bleeding their top talent, breaking the trust of their workforce, and functionally forcing their employees to take a $10,000 pay cut, there must be a payoff, right?
Yep, you'd hope so.
Like the 5-day-a-week in-office model must be producing off-the-charts productivity to justify all this collateral damage. Does the data actually show that?
Well, this is where the narrative completely falls apart for strict mandates. Dr. Westover cites a major 2026 field experiment by Choudhury and colleagues that tested this exact assumption.
Okay.
They measured the outcomes of different work arrangements, and they found that the absolute optimal setup for both productivity and employee satisfaction is actually a hybrid model, specifically 2 days in the office and 3 days remote.
2 ins, 3 out. Why is that the sweet spot?
Because it perfectly balances the two different types of work we do. 2 days in the office is just enough time to fulfill the need for synchronous collaboration, right? The brainstorming, the team building, the complex problem solving, the genuinely benefits from being in a room together.
Sure.
But the 3 days remote provide the deep, uninterrupted focus time required for actual execution.
So what happens when you push past that? What happens when a CEO says, well, 2 days is good, so 5 days must be great?
You hit severe diminishing returns. The experiment showed that moving from a flexible hybrid model to a strict 5-day mandate produced zero performance improvements. None.
Wait, literally none.
None. There was a marginal increase in how often people chatted in the hallways, but it did not translate into better organizational outcomes, higher revenue, or faster project completion. It just guaranteed higher turnover.
Okay, but if the data definitively proves that 2 in, 3 out is the most productive model, why doesn't every employee just demand that? I mean, if I'm hitting all my targets from home, why should I care about being in the office?
Because of a deeply ingrained psychological bias called the flexibility stigma. Have you ever heard of object permanence in toddlers?
Oh, yeah. Like if you hide a toy under a blanket, the toddler thinks the toy literally ceased to exist because they can't physically see it.
Exactly. Well, corporate management often suffers from a version of object permanence.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, if a manager cannot physically see an employee typing at their desk, a subconscious bias kicks in.
Yeah.
The manager just assumes less work is happening, even if the actual data says otherwise.
Yeah.
That is the flexibility stigma.
So even if a remote worker is vastly more productive than their in-office peer, they'll suffer professional consequences simply because they lack visibility.
You got it. The data shows they receive lower performance ratings and are passed over for promotions compared to people who spend more time in the building. It's a systemic penalty for utilizing the very flexibility the company supposedly offers.
They basically get punished for not being in the manager's line of sight.
Exactly.
Man, so we have a situation where brute forcing a 5-day return causes your best people to quit, destroys the psychological contract, costs employees thousands, and doesn't even boost your bottom line. And if you stay home, you get penalized by flexibility stigma.
It's a mess.
It feels like a total no-win scenario. But, the article doesn't just outline the disaster. It actually profiles the companies that survived this transition, doesn't it?
It does. The second half of Dr. Westover's research is entirely focused on solutions. It analyzes case studies of organizations that successfully navigated this exact crisis without losing their top talent.
Okay, good.
It highlights 5 specific evidence-based strategies that deal with the friction points we just discussed.
Well, let's dig into those strategies, because if I'm a manager listening to this, I need to know how to stop the bleeding. The first major concept is procedural justice. But what does that actually mean in practice? It sounds like HR jargon.
What's fascinating here is that procedural justice simply means that the process of how a decision is made and communicated matters just as much to people as the decision itself.
Okay.
Look at how JP Morgan Chase handled their mandate adjustments. They didn't just blast out a Friday afternoon email telling everyone to be at their desks on Monday. They treated it like a major organizational shift.
So they didn't just issue a decree. What was their actual process?
Well, they gave very long lead times so people could actually arrange childcare and transportation. But more importantly, they held extensive listening sessions before finalizing the policy, specifically meeting with parent and caregiver resource groups.
Oh, so they actually talked to the people most affected.
Yes, and they openly acknowledged that remote work had been highly productive, rather than, gaslighting employees by saying it didn't work. They explained the specific business need for physical presence, like complex client servicing.
So by explaining the why, they essentially treat the employees like adults.
Exactly. And crucially, they created a transparent exception process. If you had a medical or family reason you couldn't comply, there was a clear, documented path to get an exemption.
It didn't just feel like arbitrary favoritism based on which manager liked you best.
Right. The rule might still be frustrating for some, but the process felt fair.
Okay, so you communicate the transition fairly, but once the dust settles, you still have people working in the office and people working at home on any given day. Which brings us to the actual daily friction of hybrid work. And Microsoft tackled this, didn't they?
Yeah, Microsoft realized that hybrid work isn't just about scheduling. It fundamentally breaks how we communicate, specifically in meetings.
Oh, the hybrid meeting is the worst.
It really is. Because if you have 4 people in a conference room and 2 people dialing in on video, you inherently create a 2-tier meeting. The people in the room dominate the conversation, they read each other's body language, they make decisions, while the virtual participants are just completely sidelined.
Yeah, if you've ever been that one giant face on a monitor while a room full of people talk over you, you know how isolating that is. You basically just mute yourself and give up. How did Microsoft solve that mechanically?
They established strict meeting equality standards. They trained managers that if even one single person is virtual, the entire meeting must be structured as a virtual first interaction.
Wow, even for just one person.
Yeah. They built comprehensive hybrid work guides that literally force meeting facilitators to actively bring remote voices into the conversation, so specifically to short-circuit that proximity bias.
Yeah.
You don't let the room dictate the pace.
That is brilliant, and it leads perfectly into the next massive friction point, which is performance reviews. Because if we know that flexibility stigma makes managers favor the people they see in the hallway, how do you fix a promotion process?
This is a tough one.
I was really surprised by what Salesforce did here, but I'm trying to figure out how it actually works in the real world. The article said they shifted to entirely outcome-based evaluations.
Right, they use OKRs, which stands for objectives and key results.
But how does an OKR actually remove the bias of a manager just liking the guy who stays at the office until 6 p.m. every day?
Well, mechanically, an OKR forces the manager to evaluate based on a pre-agreed metric. So instead of a subjective review asking, hey, does this employee show initiative and look busy? The OKR asks, did this employee deliver the code update by Tuesday? And did it increase user retention by 5%? It shifts the entire conversation from presence to output.
Oh, I see. So it literally doesn't matter if you wrote that code at your desk or at your kitchen table at midnight.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense for the direct manager. But didn't Salesforce go a step further with the actual promotion committees? The article mentioned they hide the employee's location. How is that even possible? Wouldn't a manager advocating for their team just say, oh, Jim is great, he's always the first one in the building?
That is exactly what happens in a normal company. But Salesforce explicitly trains their promotion committees to strike any mention of work arrangements from the record.
Really?
Yeah, in the early stages of evaluating someone for advancement, the committee is purposefully blinded to whether the person is fully remote, hybrid, or in office. They are forced to look purely at the data, the OKRs, and the deliverables.
That's fascinating. It's like those blind auditions for orchestras where they put up a screen so the judges can only hear the music and not see the musician. You are evaluating the pure talent.
Exactly. It systematically dismantles the flexibility stigma. You can't be penalized for being remote if the people promoting you don't even know you're remote.
Okay, so we've fixed the communication, the meetings, and the performance reviews. But what about the physical office itself? Because if I commute an hour just to sit in a cubicle, put on noise-canceling headphones, and answer emails all day, I'm going to be furious.
And you should be, because that is a terrible use of an office.
Right.
Dropbox provides the best case study for this one. They looked at the friction of the commute and decided to completely flip the script on corporate real estate.
Mm-hmm.
They maintained a virtual first model, but they completely redesigned their physical spaces into what they call studios.
Studios. How is a studio different from an office? Is it just like getting rid of permanent desks?
It's a complete functional redesign. They removed the rows of cubicles and individual workstations entirely. The studios are optimized exclusively for collaboration. They are full of workshop areas, large group seating, and social spaces. The mechanism is simple. If you need to do focused individual work, you are expected to do that at home. You only commute to the studio when the task genuinely requires physical interaction with your team.
That completely changes the psychology of the commute.
It does.
You aren't going to the office to be monitored. You are going because the work you're doing that day actually requires a room full of people.
Exactly.
But, even if you only commute twice a week for collaboration, you are still getting hit with those financial costs we talked about earlier, the thousands of dollars in gas and childcare.
Right, which is why the most progressive companies treat this as an economic issue, not just a logistical one. Spotify is the prime example here. They recognize that pulling people back into an office, even partially, is a massive financial shock to a household budget.
So what do they do? Do they just give everyone a raise?
Well, they implemented targeted financial transition support. For employees who had moved away to more affordable cities during the pandemic, assuming remote work was permanent, Spotify actually offered relocation assistance to help them move back.
Oh, wow. They actually paid for it.
Yeah. And they temporarily extended childcare subsidies to bridge the gap for parents who suddenly lost their daytime coverage.
Oh.
They even offered one-time transition bonuses to help cover the sudden influx of commuting costs.
That's huge. By doing that, they're essentially saying, hey, We acknowledge this is disruptive and expensive, and we are willing to share that burden. It treats the psychological contract with actual respect.
Absolutely.
So if a company uses procedural justice to communicate, redesigns their meetings and performance reviews, transforms their physical space, and actually helps pay for the transition, they can survive
They
this.
don't just survive, they retain their top performers while their competitors hemorrhage talent.
Hmm.
But, Dr. Westover's research makes it clear that these tactics are really just treating the current crisis.
Right.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, organizations want to stop treating every shift in work arrangements like a five-alarm fire. They have to change their long-term capability.
Right, because the economy will change, technology will change, and we can't just go through this exact same war every 3 years. So how do we future-proof this?
The research highlights two major structural shifts. The first is moving to distributed leadership.
Meaning you stop letting a CEO make a blanket rule for 10,000 people.
Precisely. Because a rigid 3-day-a-week mandate might make perfect sense for an aggressive sales team, but it could completely derail a software engineering team that requires deep, uninterrupted focus.
That makes sense.
So distributed leadership pushes the decision rights down to the team level. You let individual managers dictate the schedules based on their specific task interdependencies.
But that requires trusting your middle managers to actually know what their teams need, rather than relying on a top-down bureaucratic policy to enforce discipline.
It requires immense trust, but it is really the only way a complex organization can remain agile. And the second major shift is recalibrating the contract.
The psychological contract.
Right. We spent a lot of time talking about how that unwritten contract was shattered. Well, you cannot rely on unwritten assumptions anymore.
So how do you formalize something that is inherently unwritten?
By making it explicit. The research strongly recommends that managers and employees have annual, structured conversations specifically dedicated to flexibility boundaries.
Like an annual review, but just for the rules of engagement.
Yes, you sit down and you clarify the baseline expectations. Under what specific conditions would the company need to adjust your remote days? What are your non-negotiable obligations?
That's smart.
When you pull these expectations out of the shadows and discuss them transparently, neither side can claim they were blindsided when circumstances change. You negotiate the boundaries before a crisis hits.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Whether you are a senior executive making these policies, or a middle manager caught in the crossfire of trying to enforce them, or an employee just trying to protect your own time and career, the overarching lesson from this research is undeniable.
It's all about the process.
Exactly. The process of transition matters far more than the final destination. The organizations that are going to thrive aren't the ones that pick the magical, perfect hybrid ratio. They're the ones that build systems, performance reviews, meetings, and physical spaces that are fair and transparent, regardless of where a laptop physically sits.
Yeah, it's about evolving from reactive, punitive enforcement to proactive, systemic trust. Honestly, if you rely on visibility to manage your team, you aren't actually managing the work.
Which brings up a final lingering thought for us to leave on, because Dr. Westover repeatedly mentions that organizations need to develop rapid response capabilities for future disruptions. We have spent the last few years fighting a bitter, exhausting battle over where does work. But what happens when the next massive disruption, like, say, advanced AI, fundamentally changes how we work?
That's the real test.
Exactly. If our organizations haven't even learned how to transparently negotiate something as simple as commuting 2 days a week, will the next technological shock permanently shatter whatever trust is left between employers and employees? Definitely something to think about during your next commute.